For this presentation, we're at JFK Lancer, and this is a breakout session. I'm with historian Carmine Savastano. My name is Mike Swanson, and I'm a historian, and so is Carmine. And Carmine really is a specialist in the JFK and RFK and Martin Luther King assassination. You wrote the book Two Princes and a King, but you also have done really in-depth research into the archives and newly released files. And these are topics I've been interested in a long time too, but these files weren't really available 20, 30 years ago. And this gives you a really unique perspective on the case. I mean, right now, you probably are doing more research than all but a few people on the RFK case.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I think I'm doing my best, and you're right. Yeah, I think there are definitely people out there who, have been doing this for years, and it's always good to have a new set of eyes. I think that's one of the things that we overlook is even somebody who doesn't have, who hasn't spent decades doing this. If they can come across something that the rest of us might have read, and it just didn't catch our eye. That happens, and it will happen, and that's why I think one of the important things is that there are gems in the old documents, and they're still there, and nobody's found them yet. So we shouldn't, when people say, well, what's in the new documents? Well, we don't even know what's in all the old documents.
Yeah, I mean, we'll get to something in a minute that you found, which is
old documents.
Is quite amazing. When I 25 years ago, or so forth, I remember reading several books about the RFK case. Like there's one by William Turner, and it was one of the better ones. But say there's a dozen or so books written in the 80s and 90s, and a lot of them, they made it clear that there was some sort of conspiracy with the evidence, because the coroner's report shows that RFK was shot really close with a gun.
2 inches or less.
2 inches or less. Sirhan Sirhan, who's the convicted lone gunman, wasn't standing in front of him. And so I learned that. And then a lot of focus was on Sirhan Sirhan, making out that he was sort of almost innocent.
Programmed assassin.
Yeah, so there was a story that he was a brainwashed person that wasn't in control of his actions, and
which is highly improbable.
Yeah, but I got to tell you, reading these books, that was really the only information I knew was what were in these books, and that theme that okay, this guy's a programmed assassin. He was brainwashed by somebody. They didn't say who necessarily definitively, and it's a difficult thing to really believe. If you really think about it, but you've kind of gone beyond that information back then by looking at these new files, and you found new connections to Sirhan Sirhan, where it's not just him, but you found people actually connected to him.
Yeah.
That are suspicious or.
Yeah. I found a couple people.
Raise your eyebrows.
Well, yeah, I think I found a couple people that definitely have some serious connections to not just the Sirhan family, but also, have motivations against Robert Kennedy. But I think that, as we can go into later, but I think that the biggest thing I found was that the LAPD had another case. They had a second person that could have declared it was a criminal conspiracy, as the facts would support. And they didn't. And it doesn't surprise me. I mean, they destroyed over 20,000 different pieces of evidence, and all the woodworking and the photographs, and destroying, wholesale huge amounts of evidence is an indicator that you think you have a strong case.
But the files that you're looking at that make you say that are the actual police files and files of the district attorney's office for Los Angeles. So you've looked at these files where they're planning out how to prosecute the case and so forth. And could you describe what exactly you saw in them?
Well, what I began to notice, I think maybe the first time I ever considered that, there's, unfortunately, the government in some ways has been inadvertently helped by people who have done some of the older research on the RFK case. Because the government's always said it was Sirhan alone, and then conversely, advocates for conspiracy say Sirhan was totally innocent. And I don't think either of those things are true. I don't think Sirhan had lone guilt. And I don't think, of course, he killed Robert Kennedy because he wasn't in the position to do it. It doesn't go with the forensics, it doesn't go with the ballistics. Just based on normal physics, if he's 2 feet or more in front of me, he cannot shoot me behind my right ear from 2 inches or less. There's just no way to get it done. But that's not, as you said, that's what everybody usually focuses on, is the crime and the aftermath. So what I did is I went to the beginning. I was like, okay, maybe I missed something. Maybe I need to go through every page. And as Mike knows, I get fairly obsessive in my reading. So I seriously went through the SUS report from the beginning. And as I was going through, occasionally, I would hit something that would support that Munir. I mean, a lot of people know, they might not understand the vital importance of it, but Munir Sirhan, Sirhan's brother, actually acquired the murder weapon. He's the person who set up the sale of the murder weapon. He provided the majority of the money for the murder weapon. He bought the murder weapon, and then he gave Sirhan the murder weapon. And this is largely overlooked. And people who want Sirhan to be innocent seem to not want to admit that while Sirhan was innocent of Robert F. Kennedy's crime, he did fire a loaded gun into a room full of people and struck a bunch of different people. So he is guilty of attempted murder. Now, I'm not saying that that means he should have been in jail his whole life as he has. I think it's ridiculous that he's still in jail. I've seen murderers get out in 10 years. So I think that's ridiculous. But the LAPD had to secure their case, so they had to make the other part of this case go away, and that is the feasible criminal conspiracy. Because if it were you or I, and I bought a gun, and you told me you wanted a gun, except people don't, people are like, well, okay, that's happened, but they don't understand the circumstances. Okay, so Munir, and let's say I'm Munir. Munir Sirhan at the time was convicted of a narcotics charge, and he was facing deportation proceedings. Probably a good reason not to illegally buy a gun. But even though that was going on, and his brother was a non-citizen just like him, so neither one was a citizen, so they couldn't buy a gun legally, and they knew that. So he bought the illegal gun from someone, and then his brother said that he was going to go use it at a firing range, but he later tells the police that he knew that wasn't true. He wanted it for something, but he didn't know what. So now you're buying a gun illegally while facing prosecution. You're going to give it to someone who's lying to you about what they wanted. The same person he would later say punched him in the face over tea water. So now you're giving it to an unstable person who's lying to you.
And not questioning it.
Yeah, and nothing. The police did nothing. And then he lied to them. When the police asked him if he was part of it, he said no. And they had to track down the witnesses to find out he lied. And they didn't charge him with obstruction or anything. They're just like, well,
Well, why do you think they didn't charge him?
Well, I think that was their leverage on Sirhan.
Because Sirhan was pleading guilty, right?
Voluntarily.
Okay.
And that's another thing. People don't understand. He pled guilty. Sirhan freely chose to condemn himself. Why would he do that? Why would anyone do that? You're trying to protect someone. You've made a deal. And the only way to keep that deal is to take total blame on yourself.
Well, the only other reason I could think of, and I don't know, is the case that were they going to give him the death penalty?
Well, originally yes, but then California remanded. But think about that. He would have chosen death over trying to fight.
Oh, no, what I mean is, if they had the death penalty in California, was a deal made where, okay, I'll plead guilty, just don't give me the death penalty.
That was possible. That
they do that.
That his lawyers might have, had a deal with the prosecution.
Because otherwise, it's
I think that he was supposed to die. I think he and Manson were both marked for death until California got rid of the death penalty.
Oh, okay.
In the later 70s.
So he was on death row anyway.
Yeah.
So he pled guilty, and he's so that's even.
Yeah. So, and to me, it's a double-edged sword, though. I think officials were stuck. They had painted themselves into a legal situation that they couldn't get out of, where they were going to actually render justice, because they knew that if they went after Munir, and that's another thing that we discussed prior, and I presented yesterday about, is that the officials actually state in their documents they had a prima facie case, which is the strongest. That's a case that gets indicted by a grand jury. And they didn't bring it against Munir.
Yeah, you found a document where there's
where they say prima facie.
Yeah.
Which, sorry. But that's it. You're dead to rights. They have everything they need. But the DA's office realized that if they went after Munir, Sirhan could reverse his testimony, he could take back his plea, and he could fight them. And then they had years of fighting with the conspiracy.
Well, how long was it between Sirhan's arrest and pleading guilty and the whole thing being over with, and the case being closed, he's in jail? How long? Do you know how long that time?
I believe he was on trial by the winter of '68.
Okay.
Or was it? Yeah, but I know January, Munir's case was still pending. That's another thing. Is the deportation case was held over, being considered while Sirhan's trial went on. So, and the DA said he was going to contact the Department of Immigration, which he did. So maybe a deal was made with the Department of Immigration. And that's another thing, is that it wasn't just the LAPD. For once, the LAPD wanted to do the right thing. They wanted to prosecute Munir. And the Department of Immigration wanted to deport him.
Well,
but the DA's office killed him. They were just like, it's Sirhan. That's it. There is no one else. And I think that's why they destroyed a lot of the evidence. Because it wasn't just, we know that the woodwork and a lot of the photos went, but there was also files that went too. So how many of these files? But they didn't destroy the ones where, because one of the files I found, Munir states that he did it. He says he couldn't have got the gun without me. That's it. That means that's the means. If I don't have a gun, I can't kill somebody.
Not with a gun anyway.
Exactly. The crime can't occur as alleged. That's my only contention. Some people are gonna be like, well, you can't prove it. I can prove a conspiracy, a criminal one. And it's all in it's the LAPD's words. Don't blame me.
Well, when you say conspiracy, you're not.
Yeah, not the overarching. I don't know who the other shooter is. That's the conspiracy we all want the answer to. But I think that what I am doing is trying to put another stone on our path. I can now establish that there was a likely criminal conspiracy, so we don't have to argue anymore with the other side about, well, there could have. No. It's not that there could have been. There was a verifiable criminal conspiracy. Now, did Munir know something more? Did he give him the gun expressly to kill RFK? That's a question. And it's not just Munir, as you know. Stu Wexler and other people have been looking into other members of the family. You had Sharif, Sirhan's brother, who made death threats to Golda Meir and Nixon. And then you have Sadala, who was accused at one time of cutting the brakes on his girlfriend's car because of an ex-boyfriend. Then you have, Munir and his extensive history.
Well, what kind of family was this?
It's a very.
Why were they doing these things?
Well,
It's crazy.
Yeah. I think that, it was, that's the thing too, is that Sharif was very anti-Robert Kennedy. He was still complaining about Robert Kennedy up until just before the assassination. So it wasn't just Sirhan, and that's one of the interesting things too, is Sharif made a comment that Sirhan did what he did because of all the things he had seen and heard a lot. And to me, that's very important because Sirhan, according to the officials and his family, didn't have a lot of friends, barely any. So he was, usually at home with his family. So who's he going to hear all these things from besides the people he's at home with all the time? If you got Sharif complaining about Kennedy all the time, and some of his other brothers complaining about Kennedy all the time, or politics, or being anti-Israel, or being, pro-Palestinian, eventually, that's, people talk about the Manchurian candidate. I don't think that happened, because the biggest problem with that is it would take months or years to program somebody adequately to try to get them to do something like that. You can't just have a couple of weeks and talk somebody into it.
Yes, for someone who really doesn't even know what the Manchurian candidate idea is, it's like you take somebody and through hypnosis, maybe drugs,
torture,
whatever it is, you make them
mentally suggestible
and controlled to commit crimes or things without their will. You take control of their will, basically.
I think it's Pavlovian condition.
Yeah. So, which, I don't even, it's very difficult to do, if it's even possible.
Well, and that's the thing, is that, no matter what you do to someone, there's always some fragment of your will. There are no just mindless zombie people that you can just point to go do your will. You have to convince them. You can lie to them, and like you said, drugs and torture. But even the CIA with things like MK Ultra, you can get rid of someone's memories, but that's the best you're going to get out of the drug repertoire that's being used in these things. So, and there's no reason to believe that the government would have even cared about Sirhan. So I just don't see the motivation for a big program to use Sirhan. And then, of course, we get into one of my favorite things, which is it has to be a small plot for all these things, JFK, MLK, RFK. It's got to be, in my opinion, 10 people at most or less, and that's everybody, conspirators, assassins, everybody. And people will say, well, how can you prove that? Well, I would direct people to the current news item about Jamal Khashoggi, who got assassinated by Saudi Arabia, and it was 15 people, and they got caught. Too many people, you get caught. You cannot have that many people. So with this, I don't think it necessarily has to be the big plot people are talking about. I think this could just be a case of the brothers turning Sirhan into an extremist, one of them arming him, and him doing what he did. And we still have the other shooter, so maybe, and that could be a connection too, maybe because the other two gentlemen I talked about, John Khoury and Issa Abbas, Khoury worked in the Ambassador Hotel. He worked the day of the assassination. He said he never went back. We have two witnesses that say he did, and they both saw him in the same place. Now, why would that matter? Well, it's kind of good to know the scene months in advance and know all the exit points and know how people came and went and know, where everything was going to occur. And then you could give that information. Not to mention, he'd have months of advance notice about the party, where the Kennedys were staying, what they were doing, how the evening would proceed. He'd have an agenda before anybody else would, because he was an employee. And it doesn't mean, but I also say it doesn't mean that it had to be him, but he has a lot of the traits necessary for the archetype of the inside player. And then that's it. All you would really need. And then Abbas was just a very outspoken anti-American political player who just happened to frequent the bar that Adel Sirhan worked at. And he knew every member of the Sirhan family. And he would visit the home. And he said he didn't know Sirhan, but some of Sirhan's friends said he did. And Abbas was, he's just the sort of person I think that would go under the radar. He's not a big official, he's no one powerful, but he has money, and he has influence, and he has an agenda. And he's familiar with all the important people. So once again, if it's not him, he's a very, I think, archetype for a conspirator. Because he's someone who can stay at a distance and influence the family members. And to me, it'd be even smarter if he didn't know Sirhan. Because then there's no direct connections. Then it's just you pulling strings on the family, and they pull the strings on Sirhan.
What was his background?
He was, according to a family report, he was in the 1950s, which is, from what I've discussed with a couple of military guys, I talked to Larry Hancock and some other people about it. He was a Palestinian sergeant in the 1950s in the U.S. Air Force.
That sounds kind of odd.
Yeah, that's a rarity for the 50s, especially with the transition where 48 was really when Israel was trying to rise and fight the Palestinian state. It was just
so he moved to the United States and joined the Air Force then?
Well, here's the thing. He joined the Air Force, right? But he didn't become the boss. Yeah, he didn't become a citizen until after. So he was a member, it was kind of like the Cuban exiles. In '63, he was a member of a foreign member of the military. So he then, later on, he joined, the Arab United Congress. He became a court interpreter. He owned a bar called the Egyptian Gardens, which was a competitor to the Feds. That's another interesting thing, is that were I the owner of the Fez, he used to get into fights and altercations all the time with politics. And I would have just thrown him out and not let him come back in anymore. But according to some people, he supposedly was maybe a contact for the Arab underground who was fighting against Israel. So maybe that's why. Or maybe he was afraid of him. I don't know why, but I would have never let him back in my bar. But he was there for years. Another interesting friend of his, besides the Sirhan brothers, is Sergeant Ray Camacho, LAPD Narcotics Squad. Which, you know, and this is just an idea. I don't think this necessarily had to occur, but were I Habas, is it possible Camacho told him about his friend's brother who was facing deportation charges, who was, you know, had a narcotics charge? I mean, that sort of information would allow Habas just more leverage if he were to use it. You know, he could say, maybe I can, you know, because Munir expected to be deported. You know, Habas was a court interpreter, so he had federal connections. Did he help facilitate what happened? Did he, you know, did he say, you know, maybe I can make it so your brother take the blame and you stay free? You know, if he won't just take the blame for the act, if he'll say he did it for Palestine, which is, you see that later political motivation that tried to woven in by the lawyers who were basically representatives for Palestine, trying to make Sirhan's act a bigger thing than it actually was, so that it would play on the world stage.
Well, you know, in a way, when I first, a long time ago, when I read those couple books about the RFK assassination, you know, I was reading about the Kennedy assassination first, and then read those books, and kind of the research you found and what you're talking about, it makes it sound like back then when I was reading these books, I thought, well, this could be similar to the Kennedy assassination. You know, is there something with the government being involved or people connected to the government involved? And now it sounds like this is more of a story, or a lot of it is a story of the attorney's office in Los Angeles and the police just wanting a quick, fast case.
Yeah.
And
yeah, it's well, and unfortunately, that seems to be what happened in Dallas and in Memphis. You know, they wanted this done. They didn't want a conspiracy. They didn't want to deal with any of the contending evidence. They needed one person. They needed this to be done because if it went too long, more questions would pop up. And that's what, you know, I mean, just the last 55 years.
That's something to remember too. I mean, this happened
or 50 years.
5 years after the Kennedy assassination, and I think if I remember correctly, after Robert Kennedy was killed, when the autopsy was done for him, there was more than one medical examiner, and they were kind of like peer reviewing each other, or in essence, and to make sure there wouldn't be the disputes with the RFK autopsy as there was with the JFK autopsy. So the officials, whether they're the district attorney or the autopsy, the coroner, Noguchi, the RFK case, they wanted to make sure that this would not look bad on them like it did for the people in the Dallas Police Department.
And unfortunately, they made themselves look worse. Dallas actually looks like Sherlock Holmes compared to the RFK case, because at least they didn't wholesale destroy all the evidence. I mean, Dallas screwed up evidence and probably did destroy.
Well, what do you mean by that? What happened to RFK? How did they destroy evidence?
Before Sirhan had an appeal, as soon as they got their conviction, the LAPD destroyed over 20,000 pieces of evidence, including the woodwork that had allegedly bullet holes in it from the pantry, photographs, thousands of photographs, files that they, you know, claimed were either copies or unnecessary. So we don't know. I mean, if we're still finding little bits like this, you know, where one of us can weave together that there was actually another criminal prosecution that should have happened that they knew about, but they killed because they knew that it would blow up the conspiracy case. And like I said, I think their greatest fear was that Sirhan might actually walk. If they were to bring up Munir and they failed to prove the criminal conspiracy, everybody walks, and then they look like fools. So it was just so much easier to blame this one person and get it done.
Well, we're running out of time. There's going to be another
Okay, yeah,
group
yeah, I
of people
wanna-
coming in here, another session. But as we wrap up, is there anything you'd like to add at the end and make sure we haven't missed or anything?
Well, I would just recommend if people want to check out the evidence. As you know, I'm real big on making the evidence available to the public. So as soon as actually before I gave my speech last night, we posted everything, and it's at tpaak.com. And there's links there also to the Past American Century, which is the podcast that Mike does, and all sorts of people that are presented here. There's links to Larry Hancock and Chuck Ocelli and Stu Wexler and the AARC with Ellen Dale and the Farrell Foundation with Wes Bradford. So check that out, and I appreciate your time.
Oh, I would think an easy way for someone to find this then would go to Google then and type tpaak.com and then RFK case. And
There you go.
it should
Yeah,
come right
it should
up.
come right up.
All right. Well, thanks for talking to me and doing this for everyone to get the information out there.
Well, I hope they enjoyed it. Thanks, Mike.